what value do we have in the world as a space and as a community? So at least that development aspect, it seems to be on par and moving forward in a more positive way. Now, moving through these key insights here, the report states that the average company has 19 employees, with Binance being the top employer with 1,800 or over 1,800 team members. Now, I'm kind of wondering how this information was acquired. Just a few months ago, there was this whole debacle where LinkedIn kind of claimed Binance had X the amount of employees, and the CEO CZ came out claiming that the company actually had 642 employees, obviously compared to what LinkedIn claimed. So how was this information obtained?
So we did use LinkedIn and we did use independent sources. And I think you bring up a good point, right? Because there's nothing stopping me just as kind of a general person to go and say, hey, I'm a trader at Binance, right? And I can put that on my LinkedIn profile, and I think many people do. The reality is that, with close to 5,000 companies in the space, some around, some defunct, we had to look at really independent sources and just see kind of what we could go out there. So the data, of course, there is going to be, I'm going to say some inconsistencies. It's not going to be 100% perfect, but I think it's fair to say that a company like Binance is going to be one of the largest employers in the crypto space today, just due to their reputation and kind of their role in it right now.
Absolutely, and also there's the matter of new announcements on new developments or products coming out of the company, and so you would think that the natural inclination is then that they have more team members, right? So I mean, that number is sensical, but with everything that happens on crypto social specifically, whether it be LinkedIn, Twitter, there's a lot of confusion in that area. Now it seems—
Always trust but verify.
Exactly. Always verify. Always do your homework. It seems that crypto and blockchain startups, right, tend to congregate in specific areas, whether it be, the Maltas of the world. Used to be at this point. It seems like that's changing. But where are those geographic locations, and what insight do you have on why that is? Why are these crypto startups congregating in these particular geographic areas?
It's interesting. I think what we were kind of expecting was that there would be a lot of companies kind of in the APAC region or in Silicon Valley. And what we found was that it's actually far different. New York, UK, Singapore. What we're finding is that, and I can personally attest for my experiences, but in the report we found that a lot of people are actually moving out of these city centers and kind of setting up shop in a bunch of other cities. And it's funny, when I would go to a lot of conferences, be it in Hong Kong, or in New York or everywhere, I'd meet people. But these people weren't from California or from New York or from Miami. They were from Raleigh, North Carolina. They were from Memphis, Tennessee, right? Small cities. And so what I realized is that there are a lot of people actually just building, and the nature of being decentralized, I think it's more prevalent today than it ever has been before, because you can have Slack, you can have Google Suite, and you could build a company really anywhere as long as you have a really good line of communication. And I think, in my opinion, that's going to be a trend that we continue to see, where you don't need to be in a city center in order to build a successful company. You can really do it anywhere in the world as long as you have the right team and the right product fit.
So we're really saying that people are quote unquote based in these locations, so for company purposes, but then they work or develop out of everything else. Because you were saying, you were mentioning personal experience. So what is that like with your company? And I know that you're based in, what is it, South Carolina?
North Carolina.
North Carolina, excuse me. And then, so what was that process like for you guys for choosing where you're based and how you choose to develop?
Well, it's funny. I actually, when we started Turnio, I was living in the New York City area, and I realized that I was working from home in a very small studio apartment, and I wasn't going into the city every day. So the necessity for me to be in kind of the center of the world, New York, wasn't there. And my co-founder, Daniel, he's actually based in Atlanta, Georgia. And so what we realized is that, we're starting a company. The proximity to one another is good for FaceTime, but it's not needed for a day-to-day. So, I ended up relocating to Charlotte, North Carolina. It's about 4 hours away from Atlanta. And our team is really divided between both cities. But we also have, one developer in Egypt. We have one developer in San Francisco. So even too, while we're kind of congregated in the southeast of the United States, we still have people all around the world. And honestly, the biggest challenge at that point.
Welcome back to BLOCKTV. It's time now for Power Blocks. Dr. Craig Stephen Wright, a figure in the crypto sphere that needs little to no introduction, self-proclaimed Satoshi Nakamoto, and one of the key figures behind what is now the 5th ranked cryptocurrency by market cap, Bitcoin Satoshi's vision, joins us now in studio. Craig, thanks so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
All right, and as well, we are joined today by Or Lokai, Vice President at BitTax, who will help guide us through this conversation and through the regulatory and legislative world that surrounds the crypto space. Or, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, Craig, so to get straight into things, we put a call out to those on crypto Twitter to reach out and let us know questions they would like us to ask you. I'm going to get to some of those specific questions later on throughout the interview, but for now, I'd like to aggregate one question that came up again and again from users. The question of why we are interviewing you, why we're giving you a platform. Now, to be clear, we here at BLOCKTV think everyone deserves a platform, and we're not here to pick sides on any particular coin or project. But I really want to know, for you, Craig, how does it feel that that is the reaction that you get from those in the community?
Should I care?
Well, that's a question. Is it something that you do care about, that you do feel is important to you?
You have a bunch of morons who have no idea running around saying that censorship resistant is important and then going, but don't let him talk. So, no, I don't listen to idiots.
Okay, so in line with that, I wanted to pull back a moment to look through history a little bit. I was doing some digging myself, looking through the bitcointalk.org Bitcoin forum from the early days of Bitcoin itself, and found a particular quote attributed and directed by Satoshi Nakamoto himself as he was on Bitcoin Talk from June 18th, 2010. And I'm just going to read a little bit of that out. It says, "A second version would be a massive development and maintenance hassle for me. If someone was getting ready to fork a second version, I would have to air a lot of disclaimers about the risks of using a minority version. This is a design where the majority version wins if there is any disagreement." Now, Craig, I bring this up just to ask, given there is obviously a clear fork that's occurred between Bitcoin Core and BSV, how does this fall in line with this?
No, there's no fork. The Bitcoin Core is a copy of Bitcoin. When I said early on that Bitcoin's set in stone, it's a protocol. You don't see TCP/IP changing radically every year. You don't have people arguing about more than minor differences in protocol that don't matter. The reality here is we have people who have different agendas. They're trying to make Bitcoin into something Bitcoin was designed not to be.
Designed not to be, perhaps, but again, I pulled back to that quote we just read with the key last line. This is the design where the majority version wins if there is any disagreement. Now, looking simply at the numbers of the hash rate that exists amongst
you're
Bitcoin
also
Core
taking,
BSV.
there's no hash rate, sorry. Hash rate doesn't decide. You obviously need to read the white paper. Where it says CPU, it doesn't say hash rate. Hash is only a small component of what Bitcoin actually is. It's been falsely sold by people like Bitmain because they don't have network equipment, they don't have CPUs that actually do any real computation, they don't verify. So they're selling you this idea that Bitcoin's about hash rate because that's what they sell. The reality here is Bitcoin is section 5 of the white paper. It's about propagating transactions, verifying transactions, time ordering transactions. If you read section 2 of the white paper, you'll see section 3 of the white paper, you'll see the references to time servers. Basically, reference number 2 in the white paper actually has the heart of blockchain going back to 1991, 97, and 99, which was a secure timestamping service where the authors published what they called round hashes every day in a newspaper. So the reality here is we have people who have no idea what they're talking about, trying to alter what Bitcoin actually is. It's not a system of I have more hashes than you. It is a system of actually ordering transactions. It is what used to be called a sort of multi-layer network. It's peer-to-peer, but with supernodes, the same as Kadzala, eDonkey, whatever else. The supernodes are the nodes in section 5. Users are basically the idea of SPV, etc. Now, where we're talking about that, we're talking about competing software, not competing protocol. And SPV won't pick up competing protocol. So this idea here that we're saying competing, they're not competing. They're a completely separate network that is passing themselves off as Bitcoin.
A completely separate network, perhaps, and I take we can debate the point of the hash rate in other senses, but you do admit then that the number of transactions would be the key measure of a network's validity. Would you say correctly, Craig?
No. Bitcoin's validity is what I said. Like it or not, the white paper and what I put in the code originally is Bitcoin. It doesn't change.
It doesn't change.
If you move away from what I originally set up, then you don't have Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. You can have a copy of Bitcoin with it airdropped to pretend. Same as Ethereum took a version of my code and basically tried to munge it up to make accounts and things. You have something different.
But I wonder then, even just looking at the white paper and beyond and the ramifications that it has, I mean, one of the key components of Bitcoin being its decentralized nature, I would wonder why vision of
once
Satoshi...
Again, you keep going on about this lie that has been propagated.
I'm just
Bitcoin
here to understand.
What do you consider decentralization? In information security, we're talking about something that is a robustness system, something where you distribute a number of different entities so that if one goes down, they don't all get compromised. Bitcoin was about making a distributed timestamping system at the core of the network that is incentivized. If you look at the past, we have DigiNotar. DigiNotar got compromised. They were one of the key PKI players in Europe. That led to the compromise of Microsoft and Google's certificates. And that, because of the nature of how PKI was a single central server, led to everything breaking. When you actually take a TSA, a timestamping authority, and it gets compromised in the current system, everything signed by that authority is always invalid. So there can never be a single failure. It's like Christmas tree lights, where if you have them in series, one goes, everything goes. Bitcoin's the same. Bitcoin is designed to make timestamping in parallel. When I said Bitcoin ends with a number of large systems in data centers, that's what I actually envisioned.
But has Bitcoin Core then ever been compromised? I mean, why the need to split to BSV if the core system has, as yet,
core system
not
isn't
been
Bitcoin.
compromised?
One, it doesn't work. Two, you're sitting there basically saying, they've got this small broken version of Bitcoin. Why would I want to stay with them? Because they're trying to add Schnorr. They're trying to do all this other stuff to remove the legislative requirements. They're trying to effectively make a system that acts outside of law. They want something where the key aspect of Bitcoin, which is actually having traceable pseudonymy, and there are four sort of quadrants in cryptocurrency. There is pseudonymous, anonymous, traceable, not traceable. And everything had been tried in the past in cryptocurrency, except for traceable, pseudonymous. And every cryptocurrency in the past fails because of anonymity. The fact that governments take them down. And trust me, Bitcoin can be.
Okay, perhaps, a question to answer in the future, but let's take a different tack now, moving away from the technicalities for a moment and looking at the legal facts on the ground. So you're currently handling a long-standing court battle over the 1.1 million Bitcoins you're trying to prove ownership for in the case in Florida. Meanwhile, we've got governments... No, you're not? No. Please, if I've
He's trying
misconstrued
to
it, please.
prove a partnership.
Okay.
I'm not trying to prove anything.
Okay, fair enough. But meanwhile, governments
a
around...
person who is basically a con man wants to falsely prove a partnership that doesn't exist so that he can get access to money he never earned.
Okay, so then I assume you must have those private keys in your possession by this point. It means that you would be able to access those yourself. I would only assume that because the bonded courier that was scheduled to arrive in January must surely have arrived by the 28th of the month.
You haven't really read outside of crypto media, haven't you?
I read fairly extensively, but I just want to clarify here. Obviously, I'm not privy to the internal details of the case. I'm getting things secondhand, so why don't you help clarify
Stop
it for
reading
us?
anything you find on crypto Twitter. It'll lower your IQ. I think about 3 points per tweet.
So then I'll ask you a clear and direct question unrelated to crypto Twitter or crypto media. Do you have access to the private keys of the
None of your goddamn business.
aforementioned Tulip Trust?
What credit card did you pay for that hooker with?
That's a bizarre
Just
line
as
of
rude.
questioning.
No, actually it's not. We're talking about someone's financial privacy, whatever else, and you guys are a bunch of incredibly rude assholes. There's no other way to put this. You sit there going, how much money do you have? What bank account do you have? Where is your money now? Guess what? There's one answer to this. Screw you. This is what Bitcoin's about. It's privacy. I mean, honestly, you guys sit there going, we have a right to know everything. No, you don't. Because a bunch of jobbers, day traders, want to know something so they can try and pump money earlier. Screw them.
Unfortunately, as matters are being litigated in open court in Florida, it would mean that these issues are a matter of the public domain as it stands right now.
No,
what you
not.
do with the money once they're outside the public domain would be a different matter, Craig. But at the moment, it is in the public domain.
No, actually, this isn't something that's in the public domain. Sorry, it's not something up for discussion in the court. So you're basically doing what a bunch of idiots reporting a whole lot of lies are saying. You're sitting there going, this is out there. That's not actually what's said in any of these things. And because the other side want to know something, that doesn't mean they have a right to even. So,
all right, so fine then. Craig, I'm not here to create angst for the sake of angst. If I asked you to give me a clear answer, you don't seem like you are eager to on that matter. And as you say, you're entitled to your privacy on that front.
What credit card did you use to pay for the hooker?
You're entitled to the privacy on that front, Craig, if that's what you want. So I'll ask then a more speculative question. Meanwhile, as we're dealing with this issue, as you are dealing with this ongoing court battle, the details of which you may say are in dispute, governments around the world are struggling to identify crypto addresses that are used in criminal activity. Now, do you think it's time for, let's say, a more simple and direct way to register ownership of crypto addresses? And do you have a proposal as to how you would go about doing that?
I've got hundreds of ways of doing it, and there were always ways. Pseudonymous does not mean anonymous. Now, ECDSA is used in Bitcoin because it's an additive function. So you can actually register an address and have things like hash chains and a HMAC of documents that actually derive subkeys that can provably be distributed between parties and allow you to have hierarchies of different key addresses, etc. A template exchange that way and provably link back to individuals, both for tax purposes and general accounting and reporting. So it's actually very simple. The problem has been that people have been avoiding all of that. They're trying to say that Bitcoin's anonymous and Bitcoin acts outside of the law and whatever else. Bitcoin's actually designed to work completely within legislative frameworks.
All right, so I'm going to bring in now Orlo Kai, Vice President of BitTax, into this conversation to discuss how that application of law exists. So just hearing what Craig said just then, how do countries around the world handle the issues of address ownership and taxation?
Well, this is actually one of the biggest problems for countries all around the world. But first, before I address your question, I want to say I read your opinion about that cryptocurrency, this is in unusual opinion, that cryptocurrency Bitcoin was never meant to be some cyberpunk anti-government tool, but to work within the regulation. And I really admired your opinion, although it's not really an acceptable one, and we can see that people choose not to report their taxes, or
Yes, I agree, but that will change. Right now, we have bucket shops who call themselves exchanges, but like all of the ones in the past, they will be brought into regulatory control. Right. With the anti-money laundering directives here in Europe that have recently passed and the gold-plated version of laws in England, exchanges will have to actually have AML. I mean, if you're only doing £100 worth of transfers in a month or something, you can probably get away with it. But the reality is anyone who's actually doing any decent amount of transactional trading is going to actually have to go through a full AML compliance program. And what you will find is that's going to start changing the nature of how exchanges operate.
That's right, exactly. And also the G7 countries are working on a database for registered crypto address, and they will share the information between those countries in G7. So the information will be all around, and maybe it will be easier to prove the ownership. The biggest problem with the ownership is the money laundering and all those criminals who can use these systems to laundering money and to maybe sell drugs and etc. And this is things that in the past used to be associated with cryptocurrency, and I hope that not anymore. So you couldn't be more right.
Mm-hmm. Yes, unfortunately, it seems that the timing of Bitcoin was really bad. It came right at the collapse of e-gold, and shortly after that you had people from Liberty Reserve and whatever else started piling in. So we have a lot of people who have ties to negative systems who thought Bitcoin would be more anonymous and started using it because of Silk Road and other things. They're starting to learn the hard way that that's not actually the case. And they're starting to learn that privacy is not anonymity. And that's why people are trying to make things like Lightning, where they can lose records. Blockchain keeps a record, it's traceable, and that's important.
Do you think, Craig, that there's any value out there in terms of those, seeking for privacy in the, let's say, anarchist, cypherpunk, but even less extreme communities out there that just wish to have some sort of private anonymity but still work within a blockchain framework? Do you think there's space out there for the sort of privacy coins, with your Monero, your Zcash?
There's no such thing as privacy coins. They're anonymity coins. They're seeking to not be private, but basically lose all records. If you listen to some of the comments by Mr. Ver and things like this, he's talking about how it will be great to see illegal securities, which are basically pump and dump scams. He's saying it will be great to see drug markets. It will be great to see all of these other things. So,
is there no place, I'm not necessarily saying for illegal mechanisms out there, but for those looking to move outside the existing financial system to utilize digital asset and cryptocurrency technologies outside the standard financial system, whether we talk about...
Of course, but outside the financial system is not quite the same as being anonymous. Privacy is very strictly defined within law, and it's important that people actually have knowledge of who they're trading with. Now, if you look at the statute of frauds, it's an old law. It goes back to the 17th century. There are requirements that have now been updated with consumer protection legislation and other such things, so that if you have a sale of, in the US, I believe it's $500, it's about £500 here in UK. The Consumer Protection Act is as low as £100. If you have these sort of sales, you need to be able to have records. You need to keep receipts by law. Now, if you want to do things where you're not keeping receipts and whatever else, then you can stay below the amounts. You can treat Bitcoin as if you're using it as cash. But the way people are doing that, the entire system of using a single address and publishing an address, is the opposite of how I created Bitcoin. When I released Bitcoin, there was IP to IP connectivity. Now, it wasn't ideal. The initial version of Bitcoin was literally an alpha version. And we didn't do things like the equivalent of SSL, TLS, and we didn't verify users. We didn't have encryption between things. So people argued that man-in-the-middle attacks could occur. But that's the same with banking. In 1995, if you went to an online bank, people could get around because there was no SSL certificates, and they could man-in-the-middle attack you, and they could do all sorts of things like clickjack fraud, etc. So the reality is Bitcoin wasn't broken, it just was an early situation that needed updating. And when you communicate with someone, you should then send a template saying what my addresses will be. You then use them once. You don't keep reusing. There isn't publishing on websites or anything like this. That's how you actually make Bitcoin not private.
Okay, a chance to change and develop perhaps. But I want to now take the conversation to a place where we can take a look at some of the responses we got asking, as we reached out to the community, asking for people to respond, to ask questions towards you. And the first one I'm going to address to you might be from a name you're familiar with, actually coming from a partner of yours, Calvin Ayre himself, who wrote a couple of comments on this himself. And he asked specifically to, and I'll quote, ask him what he thinks of the BCH tax mining cartel's plans. You got any thoughts on that one, Craig?
Yes. This has been an ongoing battle that I don't need to worry about anymore. I was actually involved with this in 2017 when Jihan tried to introduce that. I fought against it. nChain has been funding a lot of the devs in the space, and their thing was nChain won't put money into our legal systems or our coin mixing systems the way we want them. nChain can pull funding if we don't do it their way. Well, guess what? This is reality. So what they want, though, is a tax now to basically have control no matter what other people want. So if someone says, you can't do that, that's illegal, you can't allow funding of child porn sites, then they were to go, well, yes, we can, and do whatever. And quite frankly, I mean, that's stupid. I mean, the reality here is, right up until we split, I had to put up with arguments about this all the time. But it actually changes the nature of Bitcoin. It now makes it actually a security, not just a commodity-based security, but a full financial security covered by the SEC, covered under financial services legislation in Britain. There's an actual dividend paid. There's promoters making money. Everything you can argue is now part of it. And what we're seeing is a radically altered system where a small group of individuals get to control funds and tell you what you're going to do, which then they're sitting there going, we don't want it centralized, yet they have complete control.
All right, so I assume not a tactic that's going to be used on the BSV network anytime soon.
No.
All right.
The original Bitcoin is what's going to stay.
So then I want to bring in another question that comes from @CryptoZorro, who tweeted to us, if BSV is so great, why must he or anyone attack BTC? Why not just promote your better coin and not try to take down BTC as he threatens to do?
Am I threatening BTC?
Would you say that you're not?
Saying they're broken, I'm saying government will take them down. The fact of the matter is government will take them down. They seem to think they can get away with this, but Bitcoin's designed so that no matter what you do, a small number of ultranodes, supernodes, form in data centers, and they're always under the control of legislation. Bitcoin is a signaling system. The investment in hash is not what secures Bitcoin. It is a peacock's tail. It shows that you are spending a lot of money. By sending that signal out there, you're showing that you are fit and you are going to be able to handle network propagation, handle everything else. You are saying, I'm invested in the network. The reason for that is, if you are corrupt, if you're trying to cheat, you have a lot of money at risk. So if your data center now attacks the network, you double spend, you do whatever else, you have hundreds of millions, potentially billions of dollars at risk to try and make a small amount of money. And in the US, this is covered by the CFAA, Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, Section 1030, which, as the definitions of words used in the white paper, mean that you become a criminal. Dishonest, attacker, all of these things are defined words in law.
All right, so you think that that in and of itself is the breakdown of the BTC network, and it's not as any part of directed attack, whether literally or figuratively, by yourself, Calvin Ayre, or any other supporters of BSV?
No, actually, I still have entities I'm associated with have a lot of rights to BTC, so I'm not dumb enough to shoot myself in the head.
Mm-hmm. And, or as well, I want to bring you back into the conversation asking about this sort of regulatory framework and who controls that sort of criminality or non-criminality discussion. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, you're right. The government is tracking them as much as they can, because most of the governments are using chain analysis and you know, try to identify crypto addresses and to connect them one to another, and they know, or they're trying to know. But I have a question for you, Craig, because it seems
yes.
like that your version of Bitcoin is really suitable for the institutional investors, since it complies with regulation, it's encouraged paying taxes, and you know, it seems like that the only people who understand now that cryptocurrency should go through regulation is the institutional investors and the companies that are working in this field. So why is there is not many, you know, much more institutional investing in Bitcoin SV?
There's not a lot of Bitcoin investment in any fork or Ethereum or anything like that. Everyone says how much money there is. Bitcoin's actually very small. The cryptocurrency space was bigger 20 years ago, before the collapse of the industry. There was more money being transferred, etc. Now, the problem is there have been a lot of negative sort of efforts around this, trying to sell it as a system for terrorists, for a system for drug dealing and whatever else. And that's been difficult. It's made life a lot harder for anyone who actually wants to get into this in a legitimate manner. Now, I found the best way in the past was effectively not to tell people what I was doing, and to work on building systems that will bring this into alignment with law, and start teaching individuals how this can be done. So this is part of my legal research I'm doing at Leicester at the moment. So slowly I've been teaching people, including judges and other lawyers. And unfortunately, it takes time. There's only so many things you can do, and the average lawyer isn't terribly technical. So overcoming and teaching them how this actually works in a technical basis in the framework of law is a slow process. But it's happening. Where people have got to start understanding is this is money. It's not like some system that should be radically different in allowing anarchy. That's been the wet dream of people in sort of anti-government groups forever. And that's not what Bitcoin's about. The hardest part in creating, well, what is Bitcoin, is making a system that wouldn't ever be able to be taken into this, what everyone says in political circles, decentralized, with everyone running their own node. You can't do that with Bitcoin. A system where you cannot get rid of all the logging and information, you can't do that with Bitcoin. So that's really what took me the longest part to design and develop.
That question as well, Craig, of what you can and can't do with Bitcoin, I'm going to briefly dip our toes back into a slightly technical conversation, because I want to bring in the tweet we received from @somethingdelta, who asked us the question, how much will it cost to run a full node for terabyte-sized blocks? Given you guys are instituting your Genesis hard fork in the near future, this is a real possibility. What are your thoughts?
Terabyte-sized blocks will come down to network and whatever else. The reality is it's a rounding error. Right now, the nodes distributed across a large set of organizations with, say, access points in 100 countries, where you're a 10% miner or pool, would be probably 0.025% of the hashing cost at the moment. And that's wrong. It's actually should be higher towards network propagation, etc. So everyone's sitting there, how much will it cost to run a node? Well, if you're talking about how this runs, then users run SPV. They really don't understand that you only need to maintain a hash header. The 80 bytes that you get every block as the SPV header are how you know that it's secure. So SPV wasn't really described terribly well in the white paper. And after people started going off on a tangent and trying to make heroin stores, I wasn't terribly enthused about teaching people how to do it. So rather than doing that, I patented it.
All right, so that we'll address that facility, but I want to bring now the conversation into a little more of the topics for the day. What we're talking about here at the moment. We've just had the wrap-up of the Davos Forum, the World Economic Forum, taking place in Switzerland. CBDCs were hot on the menu, as well as Libra, obviously making its head. David Marcus, head of Libra, speaking there. What are your thoughts on the latest developments of CBDCs taking into that sort of regulatory conversation we've been having, and the role of Libra as a potential new type of digital asset, if not a full-blown blockchain cryptocurrency?
Well, central bank currencies will need to actually be able to handle scale and all of the rest. Bitcoin can handle that. By the time that any of them figure out what they're really doing and how to do it, they'll understand that to have customers use this and trust it, they will need to have simplified payment verification, and all the methods of implementing that, which aren't how you see it on Electrum, are ones that we've been filing patents for years on now. So when they figure out what they need to do to scale, they can come and see us. The reality is, by the time they get anywhere into a project that gets halfway towards making something, we'll have a system that can scale into the millions of transactions a second and do it cheaper than them. The problem with everything here, including Libra shitcoin version 3, and it is Facebook's third attempt at this, by the way, everyone keeps forgetting the other two, is the cost and scalability. And Facebook, their understanding of this network and how it works is abysmal. They've listened to people like IBM who don't even understand that there's no such thing as a private blockchain. You can't have a system that is premised on the publishing of a hash publicly that is private. It's just insanely bad. And the cost of Libra is about 1,000 times what it needs to be. So go for it.
But I got to wonder, I mean, we've talked about the technical side, the scalability, what's possible, but at the end of the day, we do know that the best technology isn't always necessarily the one that wins the day.
No, that's actually incorrect.
Okay.
That's what people who have the losing technology love to say. Betamax was not the best technology. Everyone loves to run around going, Betamax that was 10 times the cost, that didn't actually aim for the televisions and TSC and things like that that were there at the time, that was way too short for 30 minutes and having to change tapes, that only ran on special monitors to get the quality, was better. It's not. QWERTY is actually better. The so-called Dorvac keyboard that's so much better. No one seems to understand that the person who was doing the other test was specially trained, and that they bribed people to do the test to have their so much better. And in independent reviews of that, it's exactly the opposite. It's a piece of shit. So all this, the best technology bit, no. Ailerons, the Wright brothers basically had arguments about all of that, and yeah, I mean, I hear that all the time, and people love to run around when they lose going, well, my technology is really better, but yeah.
So you think that, but I mean, the power of social networks has to be given some credibility, surely, Craig. 2.5 billion users surely gives Facebook a potential head start, although you are correct in the sense that they have failed multiple times before to create a cryptocurrency. In this current framework, with the potential sort of power behind them, does that not give them some advantage in trying to develop a cryptocurrency on their own form?
No, not at all. Their solutions are already based on things that I've got patents filed for and granted. So if they're really successful, so is Enchain.
Mm-hmm. You intend to enforce those patents if they go ahead and use them?
You know how much it costs to file a patent?
Quite cheap, I
It's
imagine.
not a charity.
All right, so I'll take that answer as a yes. And I want to now turn the conversation over to one I know you're not a fan of talking of, but certainly relevant in the current light, that of the price of BSV. Because come mid-January, there was an incredible pump in the market which saw the price skyrocket a whopping 100% on a 24-hour period before a bit of a pullback there. And since the start of 2020, it has seen some impressive gains. Does that factor into your thinking at all, Craig? And what do you think could be behind such a big pump? Bearing in mind, of course, your Genesis hard fork is coming up early February.
I know what's behind it and who and whatever else. I know people who are doing things, and none of that's public information, so I'm not going to share it.
Okay. You would admit here that that wasn't purely sort of an organic pump that occurred because of just market interest and people wanting to trade BSV?
Oh, there's market interest, but I'm not saying who are getting behind it. So.
Okay. All right. And speaking of your Genesis fork that's coming up, excited about it? Do you see this as a big step and change in the sphere?
I see it as a good first step. So I started working back in 2013 on what we called iDaemon. And iDaemon was a distributed microservices architecture node running across multiple machines. And so that will then lead to Teranode, now that we've got everything locked down and we can really scale. And when we start getting into millions and more transactions a second, then I'll be happy.
All right, well, we'll have to see if you are able to get into those millions of transactions. But I need to know as well, Craig, I mean, we're talking about, you know, the way the community moves forward. Now, we've talked about you saying that BTC will be taken out by governments or from its own internal failings, according to you. That there are other, you know, technologies out there that you don't consider necessarily credible. But looking at the technology that exists throughout the crypto space, do you not see a risk in the sort of splintering, the toxicity, the sort of aggressive conversation that tends to occur in a space that has become highly fragmented, particularly by those with, let's say, big personalities and influences in the space? Is that something that concerns you at all, Craig? So
Bill Gates had a pie thrown in his face at the launch of one of the versions of Windows. Yet people kept buying Windows.
You see yourself as a Bill Gates comparison?
In some ways I'm similar. I've got the same sort of insanities, I'll my wife would say. But yeah, I work hard and whatever else. So, I mean, I should have more filings that will lead to patents later this year than old Mr. Edison. So I'll be quite happy with that.
Now, as well, in that sort of train of thinking, you have in the past threatened to sue anybody, and we've even spoken now about a further desire for a litigious nature, but threatened to sue anybody who calls you a fraud on social media, and even taken some steps towards legal action against people.
It's not actually what I said. I didn't say I'll sue anyone who calls me a fraud. So that's not quite correct. But yes, I have taken action against a few people who have defamed me. And defamation is not part of freedom of speech, by the way.
Certainly not. But the move to fully de-anonymize someone who doesn't necessarily believe that you are indeed, as you claim, Satoshi Nakamoto, you've offered a 5,000 BSV reward in the past.
That's not what he said. He didn't say, I don't believe. And it wasn't me who made that. Other people threw that money out, and at no point did I make the offer. But
do you disavow the initiative to out Total or not?
I didn't do it, no, but others did, and I don't.
But do you disavow the initiative, Craig? Is what I'm asking. I mean, are you against that idea, or do you think it's appropriate to be offering doxing rewards out there in the community?
You don't get to commit crimes. You don't get to commit acts that are not legal and get away with it. I mean, this is not meant to be a world of a bunch of anonymous assholes. Go back to Plato, read Ring of Gyges again. When people can sit there anonymously and get away with anything, that's when society collapses. This guy thinks that he is immune to law, that he can basically go out there and say or do anything he wants without consequences. And that's wrong.
You say that it's wrong for people to be anonymous, and yet if you are the self-proclaimed Satoshi Nakamoto, as you say, for the first 5-6 years of Bitcoin's creation, you existed in an anonymous space. Why live that lifestyle and then disavow it later?
Pseudonymous.
Potato, potato.
There's a difference. Potato, potato. You're assuming that no one knew who I was. People did. I filed tax returns. I paid tax on my Bitcoin right back from the early days. I had to fight in court because my research in 2009, 2010 was considered a hobby. So the tax office at one point said that they can't see how this will ever be profitable and Bitcoin would never become an enterprise. There's no way holding a number of coins will actually make you any money. So the end of the day is that's pseudonymous, because a bunch of idiots on Bitcoin Talk had no idea who I was. Doesn't mean that people didn't. I actually use part of my legal research is in the white paper. So copies of that are still with the universities. There's other documents. And the reality is, going way back before all of this, there were people who knew who I was. The fact that I, like Samuel Coleridge or Mark Twain or whatever else, wanted not to have my identity known by everyone in the world is different.
Mm-hmm. So then, again, I will say there were those out there that knew you have the 1.1 million Bitcoin claimed in the Tulip Trust.
The Tulip Trust owns companies.
Mm-hmm. And you do or do not have access to keys that would allow you to access funds from the Tulip Trust? I mean, it's a fairly straightforward question, Craig, that many have asked and has yet to be answered.
Screw you, stop that line of questioning. None of your goddamn business.
Craig, it's a simple line of questioning about a key part of the entire blockchain and cryptocurrency ecosystem.
No, actually it's not.
Control of a huge percentage of this system comes down to who accesses and controls those 1.1
controlling
million
the
Bitcoin.
system.
So I just think it's a fair question to ask to the person who claims to be the creator of that particular network.
No, it is a question based on I don't understand what Bitcoin is or how it works. I don't understand law. I think Bitcoin's outside of law. And I think I should have a right to know all about your finances because it might affect my day trading. No.
I mean, it could not just affect one person's day trading, but the entire integrity of a network, if not multiple networks. And it is an issue being actively disputed in a public court right now. I'm not asking you about your private bank account details.
Okay. Do we want to end this now, or are we going to move on?
Okay, I mean, I've been trying to ask you a fairly straightforward answer.
A partnership.
You seem unwilling to answer. Fine, I guess we'll leave it there for the sake of civility. I do want to thank you, Craig, for taking the time to come on and speak with us. As we say, we are here at BLOCKTV looking to give an open platform for all. I want to thank you so much, Ola Kai. I want to thank you as well for joining us today. And for all those watching, I look forward to hearing your views and opinions on this interview. So make sure you keep checking us out at blocktv.com for all the latest in news and information. I'm westropp-Evans. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.